And welcome, students. We are going to get into today the topic of while loops. So this is the first type of loop that we are going to be discussing for this year. The other type is going to be known as a for loop. There are other types of loops out there. However, for the purpose of our class, we're going to primarily just focus on these two types of loops. So let's first talk about a while loop. Now, while loops are used to test conditions continuously until a condition is met. I mean, that's the whole purpose of a loop, is to test things over and over again, keep going and going and going. Now, we have used a while loop before when we were testing for continuous input. Remember I said, don't worry about how to construct the while loop, just put it in as it is. Well, now we're going to start worrying about how do you make these different loops. So let's take a look at that while loop code again, just to kind of refresh our mind. Now, in our example here, the program will loop until the word exit is typed. So here's our continuous input here. And so we have while true. So this is saying as long as this is true, do the following things. Console.write line, enter input. String line equals console.read line. If line equals exit, break, you type the line. So what it does is it's going to continuously loop. It's going to ask for you to enter an input. It's going to get that input using console.read line. If they typed exit, it breaks the loop. That's what break does. It breaks out of a loop. So it looks for a loop to break it out of. Otherwise, it's just going to say you typed and then whatever you typed in. Right? And it's just going to keep going and going and going until the word exit is typed in the program. Now, let's talk about if you know the number of iterations. So, because sometimes we know we only want something to go 5 times or 10 times or 100 times. We want a set number of loops for a loop. We don't want it to keep going until someone types something or a certain value pops up. We just want it to go so many times. So if we want our while loop to run a certain amount of times, we can increment a variable to keep track of how many times it has looped before exiting the loop. So here's an example here with a while loop for code iteration. So here I have a variable int I equals 0. So I'm just setting I to 0. While I is less than 10, console.write while statement, and then it says write index to the screen. So console.write line I, increment the variable I++. So what this is going to do is going to say while statement, and then since this is the first loop of this, I is currently 0, so it's going to say while statement I, or in this case 0. So while statement 0, while statement 1, while statement 2, while statement 3. It's going to keep going and going and going and going up until we hit this condition to exit this. Now I'm not going to show what you would have to put in here first, because I'm going to have that show up when we talk about the code examples. I'll actually run this program for you to see what it looks like. Now let's look at also the other type, which is Boolean, which is what you want your program to do until a certain condition is no longer true. And the best way to do this, of course, is with true or false. So while true or while false. The program will run until a break statement is active and forces the loop to exit. Now, as I mentioned before, our continuous input program used a Boolean loop. It said while true. So that would be an example of a Boolean while loop. Or just for your purposes, I'm giving you another one. Here I have index is set to 0. So let's continue looping infinitely until the internal condition is met. So while true, int value is equal to index. Then check to see if the limit has been hit. So if value is greater than 5, then I console.write line while loop break. Otherwise, I'm just going to have to do index plus plus because I'm going to increment the value of index. So this one's going to start at 0. It's going to go through. 0 is not greater than 5. So it's going to increment it. Then it's going to come back to the top here. It's going to see, okay, value is now 1. I'm going to keep cycling through until it has been met. All right, so let's look at some code examples. I'm actually just going to back this up here so we can have for reference. Let's start off first with the iterative while loop. So let me just go here, file, new project, while loop demo. And let's go ahead and create our while loops. Now we want to start first with this one right here. So I'm going to say first while loop demo. And let's do int I equals 0. And we have while I is less than 10. While I is less than 10. And we're just having it output each time. Okay, so console dot write line while loop number and index to screen. So console dot write line I, and then we're going to do I plus plus. We want to make sure we increment this here. And notice I'm not putting all of the comments in here just for our demonstration purposes. Okay. So what I want to do is also put the other loop in here. So let me just fast forward this here to our Boolean example. All right, and I'm going to make our second one int index equals 0 while true int value is equal to index if the value has become greater than 5, console dot write, and it's just while loop break, Now I don't need an else here because we're not concerned about those other values. We just want to check for an if. Then we're just going to say index plus plus. Now with this one, I don't have at any point outputting what the current value of index is. So I'm actually just going to, at this point, say console dot write line, just so we can see it for our purposes. The value before the loop is plus index, because we want to check the value of index, see how it's changing. So it should start at 0. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it right here and change it to after the loop. Okay, so there's our code. Let's go ahead and I'm going to add a console.read line just so we can keep this open here when we finish all our loops. And let's run. Okay. So you can see it didn't require me to input anything. It just went ahead and ran. So here's my first while loop right here. And we started with int I is at 0. So it ran into the loop. I is less than 0, so 0 is less than 10, so that's good. So it says while loop number, and it comes back as 0. Okay. And then it does I plus plus, loops back around. So I plus plus means that I is now 1. So while loop number 1 does the same thing. Now if you notice, because this is less than 10, it does not get up to the value of 10. However, because I started at 0, there's not 9 loops here, but there's 10 loops. So that's one thing to keep in mind here. If I had started this at 1, then I would have had 9 loops. All right, so how many loops you have also depends upon your starting iteration. Very important to note here. All right, and then here, of course, we have our second loop. So again, we're starting index at 0. So the value before the loop is 0. Then you see the value after the loop is 1. So index started off with 0. It goes in here. Value gets the value of index, runs through index plus plus, which means index is incremented to 1. Then it goes back to the top of the loop. Value now has the value of 1. Then, of course, we say that it still has the value of 1. Notice it hasn't changed yet because it's still before the loop. Then after loop is now 2. And it keeps going all the way up until right here. Right? The value after the loop is 6. The value before the loop is 6. While loop break. Right? And the reason why you see this here, the 6, is because it doesn't actually exit until this check here. So it's still going to output this here, this line of code. So it does actually hit 6 in terms of index, but it's not going to be able to finish that loop because you notice we don't get the value after because, again, we've broken out that loop. So that's just some quick demonstration there. in terms of how the code works. So some good demo here for you to look at. And this might come in handy when we start looking at some of the different labs. So I think this is a good spot right here to stop, folks. The only other thing that I would maybe show you here, let me just copy this code here, is how to change this. So in this one I have a true example, so let me just go ahead and make this number. All right, so I'm just going to make a third while loop that's also using a Boolean here. And it's going to function exactly the same, except I wanted this to change from true to become false. So instead of just using a break statement here, I'm going to have this say changing the value of the Boolean. So I'm going to right here have to change this true. Now, in order for me to change this from true, I have to create a Boolean. And we haven't really done that yet, but I'm going to do a bool, and I'm going to give it a name. So let's say bool test equals, and let's start it off as true. Then what I do is I replace the word here true with test, and its functions exactly the same as what we have up here, except what I'm going to do is hit this point, instead of putting in the word break, which I still could do, let's go ahead and set test equal to false. Okay, and that should, in theory, run the same way. So while test, I want to say that is equal to true. So as long as test is true, do this. Otherwise, it should exit. So let's run this. Okay, and you can see right here. Here I have. Oh, I notice it's using index because I forgot to update this. We don't want this to be index. We want this to be number. There we go. And need to update these. Okay, so now these are all numbers. So let's try this again. Okay, so here's our first while loop. And remember, we said while loop break. And now you can see that this says the change the value of the Boolean. You'll notice that there is a slight difference between the two. Both of these cause the while loop to exit. However, the difference between the break and the difference between changing this to a false is that what this does is that it forces the loop to end immediately. This, on the other hand, will cause the loop to finish its full iteration. That's why you see the value after the loop is, and we get down here, 7. So that is the primary difference here between changing this, between that of being a true to false or additional, or otherwise. So real quick examples there for you folks. So I'm just going ahead and close out that program, and next time we'll be talking about for loops.